Or good afternoon. Is it still morning? Yeah, it's still morning. I was in a yoga session at 6:30 this morning. My first ever for that, and I don't know what time I went to bed last night, so to me it's just one continuous day. Are you enjoying yourself? You have a real treat here this morning. I'm going to get through the introduction real quickly so we can get to the conversation. Join me in welcoming the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, my friend, Mr. Bostic.
Thank you.
So, some of you might be looking out the door or around the corner, maybe wondering if the wrong person sat down in the seat next to me. I'm always saying things I shouldn't be saying and ways I shouldn't be saying it. But if it hasn't not occurred to you, he's African American. And this is a first. This is a first. It shouldn't matter. In time, it won't matter. But I'll tell you, him being selected as the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, which is one of the 12 Fed banks in the system, for the largest economy in the world, which is an economy that's north of $17 trillion right now and is driving the world economy, for him to be put in this position, beyond the fact that it means he's pure, unadulterated substance, absolutely smart, it has also said something incredibly wonderful about our nation, that we can still get through the clutter and find the jewels and the kernels in between and raise them up to fulfill their potential on behalf of all of us. Now, all that made him uncomfortable because he's a very humble guy. He's looking at me like, please stop. But I'm not going to stop. I'm actually going to...
Please, stop.
I am going to actually ask him a question that pivots off of my pride for him, which is, tell us a little bit about, and we've met and we've had some time to talk. He's a really normal guy. And when you're in a position of power and authority, it is increasingly abnormal to find people who are so normal. I don't know if that resonates with you. I'm going to repeat that. It is increasingly abnormal to find somebody who's so utterly normal. He's just a nice person. He's just kind and gracious and thoughtful, reflective, and he wants to just do the right thing for everybody. And so I'm going to ask you, basically, where did this come from? The intellect, that's obvious, but where did the humanity, the care, the sensitivity, the thoughtfulness, and the self-esteem, which, as we talk about here often in my book, The Memo, is also wealth. Where did that come from?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And if you guys ever want to have someone introduce you, pick him. that was very, very good. But you've raised the bar now. I think it starts at the very beginning. So when I was growing up, my mother and my father set a tone in the house. But it really started at my grandmother and my great aunts.
Where? Where would you grow up?
I grew up in South Jersey, outside of Philadelphia. Jersey. But my grandmother, she was a domestic as a job, and her goal was to have her kids get to college.
Right.
And that focus on education and the focus that you got to sort of work hard to build something for yourself was something that was very instilled, and then instilled in me from the very beginning. And then I had a great aunt on my father's side. She was a school principal, and she was the most generous person I've ever seen. She bought things for her church, she bought things for her students, and she lived her whole life sort of giving back. Like, she could have just taken her wealth and her riches and lived her own life by herself, but she never did that. She was very helpful for me even through graduate school.
Right.
So when I was in grad school, she gave me a bunch of money that allowed me to not have to worry about that and to be able to stay focused on my studies, and that was really helpful. And then I guess, my aunt is the other one. So when I talk about my family, my aunt, my mother's sister, she drove me crazy. She really did. She had every malady known to man. She had hypertension, high blood pressure, she had gout, she had arthritis. She was a walking pharmacy. But when I would go over, she would do all the things she wasn't supposed to do. So she ate shellfish. Her salt shakers had the biggest holes I'd ever seen. I was afraid to use the thing. She was doing all the wrong things. And for a decade, I would go to her house and I would yell at her. And I would just say, you should not do this. And then one day, it took me 10 years to figure this out, she was a nurse, right? So she already knew all these things, and she just didn't want to do it. And for me, that was an aha moment. You talk about aha moments, because it made me realize I control what I control. Right? I can't work and spend a lot of energy trying to get other people to do things that I want to do if I can't make them do it. Right. So it's really caused me to be much more grounded and bounded in terms of where I spend my energy. And I know what I control. I can worry about that. I can make that as high quality, as on point, and as targeted as possible. And then other people are going to do what they want to do, and then we're going to have to react and respond. We got to be ready. But I try not to spend any energy on that, and that's been like calm. It's taught me a Zen element. That means if you get to see all sorts of chaos going on all over the place, but you can't let that chaos change sort of where you're trying to get to. You need to understand the chaos and be aware of it, but don't spend a lot of energy trying to reshape it if you can't actually do that.
It's fascinating hearing you say this, because as you're saying it is as if we're channeling each other. This is exactly how I live my life. I live my life consciously oblivious of everything around me. It's not that somebody's not player hating me over here, or has something negative to say about me over there, or has an opinion about me that they've got that's uninformed over there. I just decided not to give it any value. And because there's a minute and there's 60 seconds in it, and I can decide to spend what most people do, 20 of those seconds on yesterday, 20 of those seconds on tomorrow, neither of which are real. Yesterday is gone and tomorrow hasn't happened. Now you have 20 seconds left, and now you're anxiety-ridden because you're running trying to do some of that 20 seconds. And you're not present. That's why they call it present a gift. And that obliviousness requires self-confidence and some groundedness, and as you say, almost a Zen moment inside of yourself. And as Reverend Murray told me earlier, life is not what people call you, it's what you answer to that's important. And never ever answer out of your name. So you obviously had self-defined who you were and whose you were at a very early age, and somebody poured that self-esteem into you.
Yeah, so two reactions to sort of what you're saying. So one, in my current job, I'm a focal point now. And I wasn't really as sensitive to that. So I don't go to any meetings with any phones, no outside communication devices, so I make sure I'm fully present in every meeting I'm in, and that's been a change. When you're a professor at a university, you're just one of 1,000 people. Most meetings, you're not the person that anyone's paying attention to, so you can sit in the back and do your emails and send some mail and whatever you want to do. I can't do that in this job, and it's really caused me to refocus again and be very present. And then the other thing that you made me think of was, I do a lot of talking now. I try to go to college campuses a lot and talk to them about just careers, like how should they think about their life. And a lot of people have this thought that if you're in a successful position, you've always known it was, everything was easy, everything was straightforward. And that's just totally untrue. So I tell the story, the two jobs before this one, I was the third choice for the job.
Wow.
And I could have gone in those jobs with a chip on my shoulder
Right.
and an attitude and all that kind of stuff, but that would have been counterproductive.
Yes.
Right? And so it's not how you get somewhere, but it's what you do once you get there.
That's right.
And the job is really to make the most of that opportunity. And I try to do that in as direct a way. You said, we're actually trying to get something done.
That's right.
And
PhDs are good, PhDs are better.
I'll put them about the same. I'll put them about the same.
Because he's
But,
a PhD.
but you have to actually do stuff, and that's exactly right. And this is one of the things we're trying to do at the bank now, make sure that the expertise that we have doesn't just become something that people put on a shelf or they look at from a distance, but that it starts to engage with decision makers and try to give them the best information that they can have so that they can make better decisions, so we can get to better places.
So before we pivot to sort of the work and what we can do to make our communities better, I want to leave one more comment for the audience that I think we share in common. We never talked about this, but it is my strong belief that we share this. I've gone through my whole life recognizing that race exists and it's an issue. But racism is sort of like rain. It's either falling someplace or it's gathering. So I just decided you might as well get out an umbrella and a color you like and start strolling through it because it's not going to change, so you must. And one of the things I decided was there could be no but next to my name. So when I walk out of a room, no one can say when the door is closed behind me, I respect that, John Bryant, but. I would invest in that Operation Hope thing that John Bryant's doing, but the buts kill you. And you've got to be obsessed with excellence. And in that regard, you can't be a black leader. I said this last night, and I think it sort of shocked people a little bit. You can't be a black leader. You've got to be a great leader who happens to be black. You can't be black for a living. You can't be Latino for a living. You can't be Asian for a living. You can't be white for a living anymore. You have got to be good for a living. You've got to be relevant and leaning in and additive, and then you can sit at the table and expect for people to treat you on your merit. And when they don't, then now we can have another kind of conversation. That was a shift from the 20th century to this one, where you couldn't expect that you'd be treated on your merit.
No, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. So you started, I'm the first African-American president, and I get a question a lot, sort of, what do you think of that? And on one level, I don't think anything of it, right? I'm the president. I got to do the president's job, and if I don't do that job well, I'm going to be out of there, right? So that's the first concern. And then I know that, because I'm African American, people will notice that and take pictures and do all those sorts of things. Sure. But those pictures will all go away if I'm terrible, right? If I don't come into every meeting briefed, prepared with questions and ideas and thoughts to move the organization somewhere. And so we got to do the job, right? And the worst thing you can do is put someone in a position where they're not going to be able to do the job.
Right.
And so for us, we got to make sure, and we're working on this a lot, that our communities, the African American community, the Latino community, everybody, they are giving their members, their residents, their families, the skills, so that when it's time to compete, they're ready.
Yep.
They can compete with the best of them. They can get it done, and then they can strive and thrive, so that 5 years from now, we don't have these conversations anymore.
That's
it's just
right.
that's just someone who's really good.
That's right. And I often say that we're living in a moment in history, but history doesn't feel historic when you're sitting in it. It just feels like another day. But this is historic. What's going on here, the Fed, is historic. Can you give them a little context of the breadth of your responsibilities at the Fed? And then we're going to pivot into the work.
Sure. I'm happy to do that because one of my soapbox things, and no one really knows what the Fed does. So we do monitor.
So last night when the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Oh, yes, he was here. Now, did he tell you what we did?
No, he didn't. But not in the way that they understood it. But I'm backstage with the principal for Bunch Middle School, and he said, "Well, I don't know what he does, but I'm gonna sit down him. I want him to help me with my student loan. And so I was like, that's
not what he does, right?
What he does.
So we do monetary policy. Yeah. So that's I should start at the very beginning. Our mandate is we have a dual mandate. One is to maximize employment. The second is to maintain stable prices, so that you have some confidence 3 years from now, 5 years from now, that you know what the price of something is going to be.
Which we take for granted, by the way.
Because we're doing our job, right? So the goal is, like, if we were in Venezuela, we would not be having this conversation.
Or Zimbabwe.
Or in a lot of places, right?
Yeah.
So we do that, and that's our mandate. We do it through monetary policy. So we control the interest rate that banks charge each other for very short-term loans, and then that becomes their baseline cost of capital. And so if they're going to do other things, they got to have profits on top of that. And so then they set their loan rates for all the other products relative to that baseline interest rate. So it's a way to transmit how costly it is to get extra money, how costly it is to do investments and all those sorts of things, and it really shapes the level of activity. We also do bank supervision, so we're responsible for making sure that the banking and financial systems are stable, they're resilient, and that they provide access to capital for all Americans in a safe and sound way. We control, and control is the wrong way, we manage the payment system. So every payment that you guys do, when you go to Target, that is basically, when you give the credit card or you give them a debit card, you're basically saying, I authorize you to take money out of my account and put it in their account. Right, so that's two banks. Those two banks are not present. Right, so that goes down into a ledger, and then we have a settlement function so that at the end of every day, and actually we do it like 3 times a day, we say, okay, all the folks who allowed people to take money out of Wells Fargo, all right, and all the ones who said put it in Bank of America, we add it up, and then we effect the transfer. So all those transactions, everything we do in the retail space is, we touch it. Everything, so if you do direct deposit, if you do wiring for money, that happens through a Federal Reserve function. And then every dollar bill that you guys have, before it gets into circulation, it comes through a Federal Reserve bank. And then we are the ones who distribute it to the banks and allow that to work. So the Federal Reserve touches Americans every day, and most people have no idea about it. And I think on one level it's good that people don't think about it, they don't worry about it. But on another level, I think it's important for people to know how the economy actually works, how things are actually happening, so that when you hear people talk about the Fed or people talk about other agencies, you know enough to know whether that makes sense or not, or whether it's on point or not.
Do you still stockpile precious metals and currencies at the Federal Reserve?
We do not.
Okay.
So the New York Fed has precious metals. In our bank, we don't. We have cash, but that's really the only thing that we keep.
Cash is fun. It was cool to me.
Most people wouldn't complain. I appreciate that.
Now, don't have your cousin Boo Boo calling him saying, "Well, I gave Joe a loan yesterday. I wrote him a check. I want to stop that. I want to put a stop payment." Don't call him for that. That's not what he does.
Don't call me, please.
So you're doing this at a macro level. You're doing this. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars of activity every day. Going through the system?
On the order, yes.
Yeah. And throughout the entire system, it's trillions, isn't it? Flowing every month. Yeah. So literally trillions of dollars is flowing through our system, and because we are a nation of laws, and because it's been done so well, it's invisible to you. But if you were in, as he said, if you were in Venezuela right now, what was the price of something yesterday?
It's going to be totally different.
It might be double tomorrow. I remember I was in Zimbabwe when they still had their own currency, the Zim dollar, and I literally had to go to the bank and convert U.S. currency to Zim dollars, and I walked out with billions of dollars in Zim currency in two trash bags. And that was just for a loaf of bread. And then they finally just gave up and decided to U.S. currency. So now that you understand what he does, let me now say that typically a person in this position, and a person of color, my experience is they step away from the engagement of issues of the underserved, not toward them. That's a whole nother meeting for another time. It's really sad to say. But a lot of times, people of color don't want to be branded, associated, saying, well, because it's a minority issue, so they actually will step away from the issue, won't touch it. The fact that he is stepping into this thing and saying, this is my responsibility for my district. How many states, by the way?
6.
Can you name them?
We have all of Florida, we have all of Georgia, all of Alabama, the eastern 2/3 of Tennessee, the southern half of Mississippi, and the southern half of Louisiana.
I mean, that's Southeast growth.
It's large.
It's large.
It's a lot of people.
And so why do you care about these issues? Why is it important to you?
Well, first, I think America is a great country. And there's a great promise and a great potential that it allows each of us to have.
Right.
And our job is to make sure that every person understands that and is able to act on it to the extent that they can. And if we have barriers in any community, that's something that we care about at the Federal Reserve. And the way I put it, remember, our first mandate is maximizing employment, right? That means you do that when you maximize the number of people who are employable.
Right.
Right. And so we need to make sure that our systems, our governments, and our communities are doing all that they can to make sure that everyone is employable.
Right.
And if they're not, that's a problem for us, and we need to be out there talking about it. So we have a workforce development initiative that's really trying to talk about where are the skills of tomorrow. There's a lot of churn in the economy today. The skills that workers have today are not going to be the skills they need tomorrow.
Right.
And so we're trying to identify those skills and tell as many people as we can what they are, and then try to identify pathways. So if you don't have those skills today, you understand ways you can go get those skills so that you're ready to compete and put yourself up to have a job tomorrow. It's a reason why we do a lot of community economic development. So I have a team in our bank, some here in Atlanta, but some distributed around our district, who go and talk to people and try to understand sort of where things are working, where are the barriers, and what kind of help do you think you need at the local level. And then sometimes we have that expertise in-house, and we go and deploy, and we'll have a conference, or we'll do a convening. But sometimes we don't have that expertise, and we're like, well, but we know you should call this person, you should call that person. And we're really trying to make sure that anyone in our district who has hope and ambition about their community or about their lives sees the Federal Reserve as a potential partner.
That's right.
We have a lot of resources to help, and we have a lot of knowledge. And you talked about the PhD versus the PhD. Yeah. We're going to be doing. We want to be in the space of doing to make sure that that anyone who wants to get somewhere can get the information that they need to do it.
So we're going to take a couple of questions, so be ready because he's got to go soon. But let me just say one last thing about this important topic. In the 20th century, the issue was here and around the world, race and the color line. And leaders stepped in and took the levers of government mostly to provide the right to vote, to provide public accommodation, to make sure the laws were being enforced. And that was Dr. King in the southern states, that was Gandhi in India, that was Nelson Mandela in South Africa, that was Michael Collins in Ireland, Cesar Chavez in western United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was civil rights in the streets. We talked about that last night with Reverend Jackson and Ambassador Young. Now we're talking about civil rights in the suites. And we're talking about economics and issues of class and poverty. So here's my question. Is it possible, two things. One, that as the Justice Department was a gateway and a protector during the civil rights movement for the workers in the civil rights movement in the South, it was the Justice Department and it's at the federal level. I believe the federal regulators and the Federal Reserve are a protector and a support mechanism and a convening force during a civil rights era of economic empowerment and financial inclusion that is being mostly unrecognized. But I think the federal regulators and the Federal Reserves could be a powerful convening force and a resource for community leaders, community by community, to make sure that justice is being served and their voice is being heard. Is that reasonable or unreasonable that people could tap the Federal Reserve for that potential, including things as simple as field trips for kids to come to the Federal Reserve? And number two, could some Community Reinvestment Act, which I'm going to talk to before I was out last night. I'm going to talk to Otting about, from the comptroller, I think tomorrow. Could CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, in your opinion, be used as a growth mechanism to bring the poor and the struggling into the economy? And then we'll take some questions.
So those are two big questions.
Yep. Choose not to answer them if you don't like.
No, I'm going to answer them. Okay. Yes, question. I'm going to answer. So I want to start with CRA because I think that I've done a lot of work in CRA. It's done a lot of good things for communities. But the CRA was built in an era where banking and financial services were provided through bank branches.
Right.
That's not really where we are today. And so we need to think about to what extent does the CRA need to be modernized to reflect how financial services are delivered.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. There's a lot of debate about sort of what kind of activities should be included in the CRA. To me, and this is kind of how I talk about our mission, I think that anything that makes people more creditworthy, that can help them to take and deploy capital in a more effective way, that should count. Yeah. That's my view, because in a lot of communities, there aren't that many businesses that are ready to take a $500,000 loan. That's and right. I'd rather help them be ready than to give them the money and have them lose it.
That's right.
Right, and so I think that's the type of conversation that we need to have on this space. To your first question about what the role is and whether we can be protectors, that makes me a little nervous. Just to be
also said facilitator.
To be direct, because we are imbued with a certain set of statutory authorities.
Yep.
And if there are implications or people start to infer that we're starting to move beyond our authority, they're going to come down on us.
Right.
Right. So we have to be careful in that space. All that to say, we're doing that now. Right. And I think it fits very easily within our mandate to be a convener and to make sure that anyone who's willing, anyone who's interested, is able to use this as a partner. And the last thing I'll say, and it's something that I think I've become very sensitive to in this role and also when I was at HUD, we cannot tell people what to do. Right? We cannot, as any kind of large governmental-ish institution, come into any community and say, you have to do X or you have to do Y. You need to come and ask, what do you think? What things have worked? What things haven't worked? That's a role we can play. But we're in this country, the federalist country, local control is king. And we are going to be very sensitive to make sure we don't step on that to give any kind of impression that we're running the show, because that'll get us in trouble. And my staff will tell you, there's a couple things I don't want to go to jail. Right. I don't want to be called up for to testify on why are you doing these things. So I want to be very clear about that what we do is creative and impactful, but in our lane.
Sure.
Right? We're not going to do anybody else's job. Right? We're going to do our job, and we're going to do it as best we can.
I think that a very elegant blending of your work and my work will be going forward, the work we're doing around credit scores, around getting credit scores up, because 44% of African Americans, as an example, have a credit score below 620, and people don't even realize you can't get a small business loan in most places below 620, and you can't get a good home loan, at least not a good interest rate. And so we got to get the credit scores up of not just African Americans, but Latinos and others in these communities. And the Hope Inside model is working hard with banks and others to be a bit of a credit enhancement to help them make people approvable or get people approvable.
Well, people will know who've heard me talk before, this is one of my soapbox issues, financial literacy and making sure that people understand the implications of the choices that they're making to spend and not spend, because they can have effects for decades. Right? And too often, I've encountered people who made decisions when they were 22 that were not probably in the best interests, and now they're trying to figure out what to do. And it's so much easier if you haven't gotten into trouble to give you advice than once you've gotten into trouble, because now you got two things to do. You got to get out of trouble.
That's right.
And then reposition yourself to move forward, and that's really difficult.
Let's go to whoever the first question. You don't have time for a question? Let's do one.
We'll do one question.
We'll do one. By the way, it's very powerful what he just said, because most people are in the surviving business, not a thriving business. They're just trying to get out of the mess. They're not looking at home ownership or entrepreneurship, or they're just trying to tread water. Yep.
So hopefully I asked a question that everybody wants to ask, and that is, I work in Tallahassee, and we do a lot with neighborhoods on the neighborhood level, Main Street for real. How do we encourage local banks under the CRA to partner with efforts to bring about opportunities for economic and employability within those communities, as well as helping folks that are working alongside agencies in those communities to get inventory that may be blighted, or to be able to renovate and revitalize, get the kind of dollars and the kind of resources that we need when priorities on the local level may not be geared towards that aim? How do we make that case to local banks under the CRA goals?
So I would say two things. Actually, I could probably have more than two things to say, but I'll try to limit it to two. First, I think in an ideal world, you wouldn't have that conversation in the context of CRA. You would have that conversation in the context of, this is a profitable opportunity for you to go and make money, right? And you can go to your loan officer and say, I will guarantee you whatever the baseline return is. You know, one of my biggest concerns in this whole space is that CRA gets viewed as charity, right? And charity is not a business model. Charity is not sustainable. We need people to start to view these opportunities as they view any other opportunities. So to the extent that that these businesses are positioned to do that, I think that's the first step. A second thing I would do is really ask, how are the businesses presenting themselves? Do they have the right financial information? Are they able to talk about their strategies and what their plan Bs and plan Cs are, so that the lenders are comfortable that there's a level of knowledge and sophistication, so that when the bumps happen, and they're going to happen, the bank is not going to have to deal with that problem. You will. Right? So I think there's that. A third piece, though, is sort of a broader conversation around where the notion of opportunity lies. Right? And at our bank, we're doing a lot of work right now on supplier diversity. Right? And the idea that that high-quality suppliers come from many, many different places, and we need to make extra efforts to find those opportunities and be out there. And so our bank, we used to be at the bottom of supplier diversity, and now we're number one. And we're number one because I got some dedicated staff who are like, we're not going to stand to just let things be the status quo. We got talent out there, and we, as our institution, we should be reaching into every corner of our community, and we're going to make that happen. So I think that changing the narrative around where opportunity is and spending effort on that is an important thing. And my team doesn't know I'm doing this, but you should let us know if there are ways that we might be able to help in that conversation, because it's an important conversation, and there really is talent out there to help satisfy a lot of the things that we're trying to accomplish.
And I'll repeat what he just said. He's number one in supplier diversity.
Number one.
That's fantastic. So they're forcing us to wrap this up. Is there a really quick something? Really quick? Yeah, really. The mic's coming your way.
Position on crypto.
And that's not quick. She asked what's the position on cryptocurrencies?
This is quick.
Is it quick? Okay.
Don't do it. I told you, it's pretty straightforward.
Now he's not seen any of my videos on Facebook Live. He know what my position was. But essentially, anybody seen my videos? Yes. I've said basically the exact same thing.
So they are speculative markets. They're not currency. And if you have money that you really need, do not put it in these markets.
Okay. By the way, that doesn't mean that the speculation won't pay off in some magical way for you. It's like going to Las Vegas. Some people leave getting paid, some people leave getting robbed. But that's not investing. That's speculation. I hope you've enjoyed this. Have you enjoyed this? I want to thank my friend for staying a little while longer than he was supposed to. I see a Mutual of Omaha Bank and a bunch of others, Synovus Bank in the audience. I do want to acknowledge the chairman and CEO of the 10th largest bank in America is sitting quietly in the audience, trying to have no attention to him whatsoever. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Rogers. All right. If there's nothing else, my mother always said, you never want to be the old guy in the club. So before you kick me out, we're going to leave. All right, we're done.